Welcome to my channel. Subscribe, listen and enjoy my stories every day. I should have known something was off. Looking back now, I see all the warning signs. For 22 years, I trusted Linda. I'd convinced myself that if we'd made it through life's roller coasters together, we could withstand anything. Our marriage was solid, or so I thought. We met young, built a life from the ground up, and worked as a team, me handling the financial grind while Linda chased her dream of being a nurse. I thought we were both grateful for what we'd achieved together. Linda's career as a nurse kept her busy, but I liked that about her. We were in it together, balancing late-night shifts and missed dinners. I was okay with making sacrifices because I believed she was doing it for us. It was hard sometimes, her unpredictable hours and last-minute weekend retreats with the other nurses, but I accepted it. I even admired her commitment to her work. It wasn't easy on either of us, but I reminded myself that these were small prices to pay for a future we both wanted. Then came the first gut punch, a small, disconcerting detail that was easy to ignore. It was a Thursday evening, the night before another one of her weekend trips. Linda seemed preoccupied as she packed, humming lightly to herself but in an absent-minded way that was different from her usual methodical approach. She seemed to be in her own world, occasionally smiling as if at a private joke. I brushed it off, chalking it up to pre-trip jitters. After all, she was going away to one of those annual retreats for the Nurses Union, a whole weekend of seminars and workshops. Linda had an air of excitement around her that night, almost like she was preparing for something big. She was unusually meticulous about her packing, too, tossing items in and out of her suitcase, trying on different outfits. She'd even splurged on a new dress, something elegant that seemed out of place for a simple work retreat. "You're packing pretty fancy for a work weekend," I joked, trying to sound casual. She glanced up, her smile quickly fading as she muttered, "Oh, just something nice for the evening events." She turned away before I could respond, busying herself with her clothes again. I didn't press the issue, though a faint unease started to grow. The next morning, she kissed me goodbye with a certain detachment, barely lingering before hurrying off. Watching her drive away, I felt an odd pang of something I couldn't quite place, a sensation that hovered between suspicion and dread. I was used to her leaving for these work trips, but today felt different, as if she was closing a chapter in our lives that I wasn't a part of. After Linda left, I went about my day, pushing the unsettling thoughts aside. But as the hours passed, the lingering unease turned into a nagging curiosity I couldn't shake. My mind replayed every detail of the past few weeks, grasping at any clue that might explain why I was feeling this way. I wondered if I was imagining things, letting my mind spiral out of control over something that was probably nothing. But there was one thought I couldn't ignore: the new dress, the excitement, the way she had seemed so distant. I went to her dresser, feeling ridiculous as I sifted through her belongings. It was then that I found her credit card statement, tucked away in a drawer. Part of me felt guilty, almost like a trespasser in my own house. But another part, that instinct that refused to let go, told me to look deeper. There it was. Transactions for expensive dinners, hotel bookings in cities she'd never mentioned, all under the guise of work trips. My hands trembled as I skimmed through each line, each charge a stab of betrayal. A name appeared frequently in her texts: Mark. In my heart, I knew this wasn't just a friend or colleague. Linda had been sharing her weekends with someone else, living a double life behind the facade of our marriage. The shock left me numb, my mind reeling as the reality set in. Linda was cheating on me. A decade's worth of memories, of sacrifices, of trust, all felt like a lie. I slumped back in disbelief, trying to process what I had just uncovered. The life I thought I had, the love I believed was unshakable, it all felt like a sick joke. I sat alone in our quiet house, the walls echoing memories of our life together. My hands clenched the crumpled statements, the receipts that told a story I wished wasn't true. For hours, I struggled between anger and heartbreak, cycling through emotions I'd never thought I'd feel for the woman I'd once loved so completely. I couldn't decide if I wanted to confront her right then or wait until she returned. Part of me wanted answers, to hear her say she'd made a mistake and wanted to fix things. But another part of me, that burning fury, wanted her to know I'd already made my decision. The quiet anger building inside me began to drown out the pain, replaced with a resolve I hadn't felt in years. I was going to make her pay. The Linda I thought I knew no longer existed. In her place was a stranger who'd destroyed everything we had built. I couldn't let her walk away unscathed, not after betraying me like this. Linda came back Sunday evening, later than I expected. By then, I was ready, but I'd managed to mask my anger under a cool, indifferent demeanor. When she walked through the door, she looked refreshed, too refreshed, considering the so-called grueling work weekend she described. Her eyes darted to me, and I thought I saw a flicker of guilt, but she quickly masked it with a tired smile. "Hey," she said, dropping her bags by the door. "Hey," I replied, trying to keep my tone neutral. My fists clenched behind my back, though she couldn't see. "God, that retreat was brutal," she said, rubbing her temples as if to sell her lie. "All those seminars and barely any time to breathe." I gave her a short nod, studying her face as she walked over to the fridge and poured herself a glass of water. I could feel the tension creeping up my spine, an urge to call her out right there. But I needed to stay calm, to stick to the plan I'd meticulously crafted over the weekend. If I blew up now, I wouldn't get the satisfaction I was aiming for. "So, how was your weekend?" she asked, too casually. Her eyes didn't meet mine as she drank, focusing on some far-off spot over my shoulder. "Quiet," I said. "Had some time to think." I watched her carefully as I spoke. I wanted to see if there was any sign of remorse or realization. She nodded, feigning interest, before launching into a description of the workshops and networking sessions she'd been buried in. I had to fight back a bitter laugh as she spoke, stringing together a web of stories with practiced ease. The audacity was stunning, really, how she could lie so smoothly, as if she truly believed every word she was saying. That hurt the most. When she finally stopped talking, I could feel my patience slipping. I took a deep breath. It was time to shatter the illusion she thought she'd so cleverly built. "Linda," I began, my voice steady. She looked up, her face betraying the slightest hint of apprehension. "I know." She froze, her glass of water halfway to her lips. "Know what?" "I know about Mark. I know about the hotels, the dinners, the work trips that never actually involved any work," I said, my tone even, almost conversational. Inside, my anger simmered, but I kept my voice controlled, calm. Her face went white, and she put the glass down with a clink. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing as if searching for words. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, trying to figure out if there was a way out of this. She knew she was caught, and there was no talking her way out of it. "Please," she finally said, her voice wavering. "It's not what you think." "Oh. So you haven't been sneaking off with him on these weekends?" I leaned in, letting the anger seep through just enough to make my point clear. "Don't insult my intelligence, Linda." She looked down, her shoulders slumping, a shadow of shame flickering across her face. I didn't mean for it to happen like this," she whispered. "How did you mean for it to happen, then?" I shot back, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. "How many lies did it take to build up this fantasy of yours?" Linda flinched, but she didn't answer. Instead, she dropped into a chair at the kitchen table, burying her face in her hands. "I never wanted to hurt you," she mumbled, her voice barely audible. I thought I could keep things separate." "Separate?" I repeated, incredulous. "You thought you could live two lives, one with me and one with him, and I'd never find out?" "That's not separation, Linda, that's betrayal." She looked up, her eyes wet, pleading. Please, just listen to me. I felt so alone. You were always so busy, always wrapped up in work. And Mark, he made me feel wanted, understood. I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. So, it's my fault, then. Because I was working to keep a roof over our heads, to support your dream, that gave you a free pass to throw away our marriage. It's not like that, she insisted, her voice breaking. It's just. I needed something that I wasn't getting here. I shook my head, disgusted. You know what, Linda? You can keep your excuses. I don't need them. The room was silent for a long time, the weight of her betrayal pressing down on both of us. I saw her eyes darting around, as if searching for an escape. But she was trapped, just like she tried to trap me in this farce of a marriage. What happens now? She finally asked, her voice small. Now. I said, taking a deep breath. Now we're done. I'm filing for divorce. She looked up, shocked, as if she hadn't expected me to go that far. Wait, can't we try to work this out? Work this out? I echoed, my voice hard. There's nothing left to work out, Linda. You made your choice when you let him into your life. You can have him. I'm done being the fool in this house. Linda started to protest, but I held up a hand. No more lies, no more begging. It's over. I'll have the papers ready by the end of the week. Her face crumpled, but I felt nothing but a hollow satisfaction. For the first time in years, I saw her for who she truly was, someone who had no qualms about sacrificing everything we'd built for a thrill. With nothing left to say, I turned and left the kitchen, leaving her sitting there, stunned. In that moment, I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if I was finally free from the shackles of a lie I hadn't even known I'd been living. Linda might have thought she could twist this situation, plead her way back into my life. But there was no forgiveness left in me. I slept on the couch that night, leaving Linda to face the cold, empty space in our bedroom. I wasn't ready to be near her, couldn't bear the thought of lying next to her, as if nothing had happened. My mind was a whirlpool, a violent storm of anger, betrayal, and, somewhere deep down, sorrow. But that sorrow was a small ember in the face of the raging inferno within me. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying our life together over and over, the memories tarnished by her betrayal. The next morning, Linda was waiting in the kitchen, looking like she hadn't slept at all. I barely glanced at her as I poured myself a cup of coffee, keeping my distance. She tried to speak, her voice low and pleading, but I silenced her with a look. Save it, Linda, I said coldly. We've already said everything there is to say. I sat down at the table, deliberately ignoring her. She stood there for a moment, defeated, before finally leaving the room. I felt a sense of satisfaction seeing her so broken, but that satisfaction was hollow. The truth was, I wanted to feel better, but nothing could dull the ache that had settled into my chest. After a few hours, I left the house to get some air, to think. I needed to get out, to feel the sun on my face and the wind against my skin, something to remind me that I was still alive, still my own person, separate from the mess my life had become. I wandered through the park, letting the crunch of gravel under my shoes distract me from the bitterness gnawing at my insides. My thoughts spun, cycling through memories of us, how we met, the dreams we'd shared, the life we'd built. And all of it felt like a lie now, just a flimsy facade that had come crashing down. By the time I got back home, I had a plan in mind, one that went beyond just divorcing her. I wanted her to feel the pain, the shame, and the helplessness I'd felt since finding out about her betrayal. She thought she could hide her affair, shield it from me, keep our life together as a safety net. But I wasn't going to let her off that easy. In the following days, I began gathering information, documenting everything, bank statements, credit card receipts, her messages with Mark. Every piece of evidence was a nail in the coffin of our marriage, but more than that, it was my insurance. I wanted to walk away from this mess with everything I deserved, leaving her with nothing but the fallout from her choices. I hired a lawyer, someone recommended by a friend who had been through a bitter divorce. She was sharp, meticulous, and sympathetic to my situation, which only fueled my resolve. Together, we built a case that would leave Linda with nothing more than the consequences of her actions. I wanted the house, full custody of our kids, and a clean break from the wreckage she had made of our lives. Linda, meanwhile, seemed to oscillate between denial and regret. Some days, she was quiet, staying out of my way, her face etched with guilt. Other days, she tried to approach me, pleading for forgiveness, claiming that we could fix things, that it was just a mistake. But I saw through her words, knew they were hollow, fueled more by fear of losing the life she'd grown comfortable with than by any real remorse. Her apologies were nothing but smoke, and I had no intention of breathing them in. A week after I'd confronted her, she came to me with tear-filled eyes, her voice barely a whisper. "Please, can't we at least try?" she begged. "I know I messed up, but I want to make it right. I'll do anything." I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt nothing but disgust. "Do you even hear yourself, Linda? You want to make it right? Do you even understand what you've done?" She looked away, her face crumpling as she fumbled for words. I was lonely, and you were always so busy." I cut her off, my voice cold. "So you cheated? That's your answer? You destroyed our marriage because you felt lonely?" I shook my head, unable to believe the audacity of her reasoning. She started crying, her shoulders shaking with sobs, but I felt no sympathy. "I can't believe I was so blind," I said, almost to myself. 22 years, Linda. 22 years, and this is how it ends." She tried to reach for me, but I pulled away, her touch now feeling foreign, repulsive. I wasn't going to let her keep up this charade. I turned away from her, my mind set, my heart cold. In the days that followed, I began moving forward with the plan I'd set in motion. My lawyer was thorough, making sure every detail was in place. I felt a grim satisfaction in knowing that, soon, she would face the full weight of her choices. I had spent years building a life with her, but now I was focused on rebuilding my own life, one where her betrayal would no longer haunt me. Eventually, the papers were ready, and I handed them to her without a word. She stared at the envelope, her hands trembling as she realized what it contained. She looked up at me, her face crumbling as she opened it, her eyes scanning the divorce terms. I could see the shock in her eyes as she read through each clause, each demand. "No, please," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't do this." But I was done. I had given her the best years of my life, only for her to betray me. This was the consequence of her actions, the price she had to pay. I watched her as she crumbled, feeling a grim sense of justice as I finally took control of my life back from the wreckage she had made of it. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in weeks, knowing that soon, I would be free from her lies, free to rebuild my life from the ashes of our marriage. The weeks following the divorce papers felt like a strange limbo, a half-life as I waited for the process to grind forward. Linda spent most of her days in our spare bedroom, away from me, knowing there was no point in trying to patch things up. I told her she could stay until the divorce was finalized, partly because it seemed easier than facing more arguments. I was simply biding my time, each day bringing me closer to the freedom I craved. Then came a day I didn't expect, a day that shattered the quiet routine I had slipped into. One morning, as I sifted through the mail, I found an envelope addressed to me in Linda's handwriting. She hadn't left anything in my hands since the papers, so I was curious. I opened it slowly, expecting maybe an apology letter or some final plea to stop the divorce proceedings. But it wasn't a letter, it was a hospital report. A numb feeling crept over me as I scanned the details. Linda had gone to the doctor a week before the confrontation, and the report confirmed something she hadn't told me. Linda was in the early stages of a serious illness. The details were vague, but the word oncology was stamped in cold, clinical type across the top of the page. She had been diagnosed with cancer. A pit opened up inside me. I dropped the paper, my mind reeling as the implications washed over me. This was why she'd been so distracted, so tense. She'd found out she was sick, and rather than confide in me, she had turned to someone else, filling her need for comfort in the arms of another man. As twisted as it was, her infidelity suddenly looked different under this new light, colored by the desperation of someone facing their own mortality. I didn't know what to do with this information. Part of me wanted to tear up the report, pretend I hadn't seen it, and let the divorce roll forward. But another part of me, a part I'd thought I had buried in the wreckage of our marriage, couldn't ignore the ache I felt for her. Despite everything, 22 years together had left roots in me that I couldn't simply pull out. I couldn't pretend that her illness was none of my business, no matter how much I wanted to. Hours passed as I sat there, staring at the report, until finally, I stood up and went to her door. I knocked, waiting for her answer. After a moment, she opened the door, looking tired and worn. Her eyes widened when she saw the report in my hand, and she sighed heavily, as if she had been expecting this day. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, my voice rough with emotions I didn't want to feel. She looked away, her face pale. "I didn't want. I couldn't tell you, not after everything I'd done. I thought it would just complicate things." "So you went to him instead?" I demanded, my voice harsher than I intended. "You let him be the one to comfort you?" Her shoulders sagged, and she met my gaze, a tear slipping down her cheek. "I didn't know how to tell you. I was scared, ashamed. I thought maybe if I could just feel something other than fear, just for a little while, it would make everything bearable. I know it sounds selfish, but I didn't know what else to do." I struggled to keep my anger at bay. Her reasoning didn't make the betrayal any less bitter, but it complicated things. There was a part of me that still wanted to hate her, to push her away, but there was also a part that couldn't ignore the woman I'd loved for so long, who was now facing something so terrifying and painful. After a long silence, I spoke, my voice barely a whisper. "What do you want me to do, Linda?" She shook her head. "I never wanted you to find out this way. I thought I could just deal with it on my own. I wasn't asking you for anything. I know I have no right to ask you for anything after what I did." Another silence hung between us, and I wrestled with my emotions, my pride clashing with a loyalty that wouldn't die, even after all the hurt she'd caused me. Finally, I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my decision settle over me. "Linda, whatever's happened, whatever mistakes we've made, I can't just walk away from you now. I'm not saying things can go back to the way they were, but if you need help, I'll be here." Her expression crumpled, and she let out a broken sob, covering her face with her hands. I watched her, feeling a strange mixture of sorrow and relief. This wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't reconciliation, but it was a way forward, something I could live with, even if it meant facing my own pain in the process. Over the next few weeks, I helped her get through doctor's appointments and treatments, standing by her as she faced her diagnosis. She didn't ask for my forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. But in the quiet hours we spent together, I found a strange sense of peace, a sense that we were finding a new way to be in each other's lives, even as everything else was falling apart. In the end, the divorce went through, and we separated on terms that were both painful and necessary. Linda moved into a smaller apartment nearby, and we agreed to stay in each other's lives, bound now by a different kind of commitment, one forged not by love or marriage, but by the experience of facing life's darkest moments together. As time passed, I found myself moving forward, not with hatred or regret, but with a strange, quiet gratitude. It wasn't the ending I had envisioned, and it wasn't the ending I'd wanted. But it was an ending I could live with, one that taught me that sometimes, forgiveness is less about forgetting the hurt and more about choosing to move beyond it.